So when land starts to die, everything we have is in our land. The land holds our ancestors, the land holds our songs, it holds our stories. And when that starts to die, we start to die. So I think there is an urgency in dealing with climate change.
The premise of the workshop is really, it's an Indigenous decision-making workshop, so it's to support communities to determine what projects they require in their communities to respond to the impact of climate change. We know Indigenous communities are detrimentally impacted by climate change, but unfortunately, most of the funding doesn't reach the ground for First Nations communities, Indigenous communities across the Pacific. So this workshop is to support communities to determine which projects they want developed, and then to link them with academic experts working in the field that can then help develop a business case for funding for those projects.
The Indigenous Peoples Organisation of Australia has created this Indigenous community decision-making workshop. We're here to listen and learn from the community members that are here. So there's people from all across Australia, as well as the Pacific as well. And these are important conversations to have, and it's linking up the Indigenous knowledge and values with Western researchers. It's like a sharing of experiences that we can tell more coherent stories about climate change.
We chose to focus on mitigation, adaptation and capacity building because it does align with those areas that the UNFCCC does deal with, and we're also looking towards funding these projects and how they might fit into funding mechanisms following their development.
So this is a unique opportunity, as an academic, sometimes / practitioner. You go to these conference meeting settings, it's either all experts or all academics or both. But it's very seldom where you have communities at the heart, at the very focus. And this approach that we have here, which is very unique, is you have community at the center.
There's been a whole range of issues that people have raised. And so they come from very diverse environments. The needs of each community will vary. And so we've had an array of experts that can support those communities to work out exactly what they do need so that there's tangible benefits for those communities at the end of it.
This is my first time coming to one of these gatherings, or I'd call it a gathering, because we've got many Indigenous nations from around. There was a lot of talk about the ocean, climate change, but I suppose my main concern is about the destruction of our barker. Other people know it as the darling. We call it barker in Barkindji language. Barker means river, and that's the main cause, as far as why I'm here. And gave me an immediate here to fight for the barker, because we as Barkindji people, we can't tell our stories if that river not flowing. So we need it to flow to be able to keep our tradition alive.
I'm seeing the effects of climate change in community. In a lot of our communities, we're seeing the aquifers get really low. We're also seeing things getting into water a lot more. So people are having to boil water before consuming. So a lot of the houses out on community were built in the 80s, and they're more or less tin sheds. So people, especially old people, will feel the cold more or feel the heat more, and they'll go to Alice Springs to get respite. We have a clinic that services the 16 homelands, and they're pretty stretched. They're doing repairs and maintenance on them at the moment, but it's not repairs and maintenance we need. What we need is appropriate housing out on our communities.
See, I feel that while everyone's targeting and aiming at prioritizing these little islands, there are drastic changes that are happening to my island as well, because it's already getting up to the houses, the heights, the impacts, erosions, and that's happening around the island, not only where the community area is, but also in other areas that are cultural heritage sites and so forth. And while everybody else is turning a blind eye because it's already here on our island now.
We cannot just build our resilience and adapt and adapt and adapt. To what end? You have to cut the emissions and then continue to build the adaptation. So there is a really huge inspiration of how our communities are doing that. So for us in the Pacific, I often say that we have a culture of resilience. What we are facing with climate change and any other change, whether it's economics or a lot of these stresses that are happening, we have to face all of them at once. At the same time, we can't just separate climate change from all the other issues. And climate change feeds on the vulnerabilities.
There's been so much research around how we work within communities or what our communities are engaged with. Yet, when we come to the policy or when we come to the international policy level, it's absent.
And they're always looking to us as local knowledge holders to help them, and our people are not getting recognised for their knowledge and their role. It's a big role what they play, and they don't get recognised properly in money wise.
For too many years, we've had people come in and research us apart from us. So coming together and actually having that co-design and collaboration and that kind of work, that gives us ownership. And when someone has ownership, they're more likely to engage with it.
That's what I think is unique in what's happening here, is that we are not learning from mistakes. We're actually saying the mistakes first and then trying to build from there.
They're both experts, the community members who are attending and the academic experts, but they just bring different experiences and different skills. So in melding those together, we're hoping that we will be able to develop responsive projects that respond to the needs of those communities on the ground.
We've got a strong background here with 60,000 years of Indigenous management of biodiversity, and governments are starting to understand now how Indigenous peoples being on land, doing that work, how that's helpful for climate change outcomes, biodiversity outcomes, as well as people, like there's livelihoods and community outcomes. So I think in the Australian context, it's highlighting those strengths.
It's also about finding a way that we share power, and sharing power in the education system, sharing power in policy creation, so that it's not just a specialized or unique form of knowledge, but it's mainstream. And I say that we do that for Indigenous, especially climate knowledge.
If we have to, like from a traditional knowledge standpoint, you build the resilience of the system. So you don't just build one component and leave all the others out. And that's, I think, and that's the traditional way of doing things. It's never sectoral. It's always a holistic. It's always about a system. And I do find inspiration from that approach.
I think my aim going back now is trying to do more community stuff where I can educate them in what climate change is, why it's happening, stuff like that. I think there's need more education around it, because people are seeing these things but don't realize how bad it may get.
If we don't keep the fight, and the next generations to come to keep this fight, government has to listen.
We are the Baka people from the West. We grow up in the bush, it can't get better than this.
Money can't solve it. It's the people who live on the ground that they have to listen to. The local knowledge holders, because we live it and we see it every day, the changes in the river system.
Just me being here made me think about what can I do when I go back home to help these families in preparation for the next monsoon, because we can't be waiting around and trying to say, government, hey, help us out here. What are we going to do from the ground level?
Thinking of climate change is there are two things that always come to my mind. Is that it's unfair. Unfair in the point that from the Pacific Islands, and I'm sure that the other indigenous communities, is that we did not cause it, but we're suffering a lot from it, and the impacts on indigenous communities, people and their environments, cultures, and their very own existence. There is that feeling like it's not fair. But then the second part about it is that it doesn't discriminate as well, the impacts, because it doesn't discriminate in the sense that everybody's affected. Whether you are in Australia or you are in America, in London, everyone is impacted. The intensity or the level of those, or the ranges of those impacts differ, but everyone is impacted.
Hopefully, philanthropy groups out there, private sector groups out there, when they watch this video, it's not just government that needs to fund this types of unique spaces of dialogue and conversation. And hopefully more groups come through to support that, because if we don't, we continue to work in silos.
So, what does a climate resilient future look like for your community?
I think somewhere where we can continue to live on our homelands, because we have better health outcomes, we have better mental health outcomes when we're on our country. So being able to stay on our country into a future long term.